Pay attention to the girl in the black dress. To passers-by, the scene might seem routine. A young woman and a man reserving a room at a motel. Nothing special, right? However, if you observe more carefully, you'll notice something strange. The girl is standing apart from him, arms crossed, as if protecting herself from something. Her eyes, restless, look around as if searching for an exit, a hope. The man, on the other hand, seems calm, in control of the situation. Suddenly, he turns to her and, with a firm voice, orders her to come closer. The girl, visibly frightened, quickly obeys, but before taking a step, discreetly wipes away a tear rolling down her face. This scene, captured by security cameras, hides a much darker secret than anyone could imagine. The man, who claims to be a police officer, isn't there to protect or help. On the contrary, he is the threat. What no one knew at that moment was that, soon, he would leave a trail of destruction wherever he went. Minutes later, the police receive an urgent call. A man has been found shot in the stomach, not far from there. While the officers try to understand what happened, another call comes in, this time from a gas station on the same street. The report is even more alarming. A young man stole a car and drove at high speed, as if in an action game, without caring about the consequences. The chaos was just beginning. The man, who once dreamed of being a police officer, is now a dangerous criminal, a killer on the loose. He's not afraid to hurt or rob anyone who gets in his way. But what he doesn't know is that the person who can end his desperate escape is right by his side. His own hostage, Aundreah Maes, a young woman of just 19 years old. You won't want to miss this story of overcoming injustice. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like the video and share it with those who also need to know about this incredible journey. Your support makes all the difference. Aundreah's story, however, is intertwined with another mystery that began a day earlier. On July 24, 2016, Julie Van Cleve, a worried mother, started receiving numerous messages and calls about her 23-year-old daughter, Kaylee Sawyer, who had mysteriously disappeared. Julie's heart tightened with each new message. Have you seen Kaylee? Have you heard from her? The silence on the other end was frightening. Desperate, Julie tried calling her daughter several times. Sometimes, the phone went straight to voicemail, as if it were turned off. Other times, it rang, but no one answered. This small detail, that the phone was still ringing, increased the anguish. Was Kaylee avoiding her mother and boyfriend? Or had something much worse happened? As the hours passed, concern turned into desperation, and Julie and Kaylee's boyfriend decided to contact the police. They knew something was wrong, but had no idea how serious the situation really was. The next day, a rookie police officer named Isabel Ponce ran into her local police station, visibly shaken. She brought crucial information about Kaylee's disappearance. During a heated argument with her husband, Edwin Lara, a 34-year-old police officer in training, Isabel discovered disturbing secrets. Edwin wasn't the man she thought she knew. He had been involved in something terrible, something that could be linked to Kaylee's disappearance. From this moment on, the pieces started to fall into place. The man who was terrorizing the streets, stealing cars, and taking lives was the same Edwin Lara. And now, he had Aundreah Maes, the young woman in the black dress, as a hostage. But what he didn't know was that Aundreah, despite her fear, was determined to fight for her life. She knew that somehow, she would have to outsmart her captor and find a way to escape. This story, which began with a simple disappearance, was about to turn into a race against time, where a young woman's courage could be the key to stopping a killer on the run. Isabel Ponce sat with the detective for hours, the weight of her revelation growing with each word. She recounted with a trembling voice that she had discovered something terrible. Her husband, Edwin Lara, had hidden Kaylee Sawyer's belongings inside the shed at their house. Among the items were personal objects that made it clear that Kaylee hadn't simply disappeared. Something much more sinister had happened. Edwin had also stolen Isabel's service weapon and her car, leaving a trail of uncertainty and fear. With this information, the police initiated a desperate hunt for Edwin. But he was already far away. While the authorities in Redmond, Oregon, were still trying to piece things together, Edwin had already traveled miles. That same night, he was in Salem, a city hours away, completely oblivious to the pursuit unfolding behind him. Meanwhile, in Salem, 19-year-old Aundreah Maes was finishing a long day at work. She had decided to cover a colleague's shift, so her day, which should have ended in the afternoon, extended into the night. Exhausted, she got into her car, ready to finally go home. The heat was stifling, so to cool off a bit, Aundreah opened the driver's window and relaxed, started browsing Snapchat, distracted after an exhausting day. It was at this moment that her life changed forever. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of nowhere, quick and threatening. Before Aundreah could react, an armed hand reached through the open window. The man, without hesitation, unlocked the door and entered the car with frightening speed. The gun was pointed directly at her. Panic overtook Aundreah, but everything happened too fast for her to fully process. He handcuffed her and, unceremoniously, pushed her to the passenger seat. Want to follow more inspiring stories and content that will surprise you? Then, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to receive all the news firsthand. While driving, the man, Edwin Lara, began talking to her, as if trying to establish some kind of connection. He asked questions about her life, her family, her siblings. But Aundreah, even terrified, knew that answering could be dangerous. She kept calm and repeatedly said she didn't want to answer his questions. That's when the mood changed. Edwin became visibly irritated. He took the gun and pressed it against Aundreah's thigh, the cold, hard metal against her skin. "You think this is a game? You think this is a joke? Because I will shoot you. I'm not kidding." The threat was real, and Aundreah knew it. Her heart was racing, and fear consumed her. She was convinced she wouldn't see the dawn. At that moment, she believed her life would end there, in that car, at the hands of a man she barely knew, but who clearly had nothing to lose. But instead of surrendering to dread, something unexpected happened inside her. The fear that could have paralyzed her gave way to a wave of confidence she never imagined having. Aundreah knew she needed to stay calm, that she needed to think fast if she wanted to get out of that situation alive. She never, in her worst nightmares, imagined that something like this could happen to her. It was surreal, as if she were living a movie scene, but reality was brutal and relentless. And at that instant, a certainty took over her mind. She didn't know how, but she needed to survive. As Edwin continued to drive, Aundreah struggled internally to find a way to escape. She didn't know if she would have another chance. Every word, every move she made needed to be calculated. She couldn't show panic, but she also couldn't give in. The confidence she had discovered within herself might be her only weapon on this terrifying night. The night wore on, and the tension inside the car was palpable. Aundreah knew her life was in the hands of a killer. But even so, she decided she wouldn't be a passive victim. "I knew I wouldn't see my family again. I thought they would end up finding my body dumped somewhere or dead in a motel. When I felt like this, instead of crying, I yelled at him. I was so angry that I couldn't stay quiet anymore." After driving for hours, the kidnapper, Edwin, stopped at a simple motel near a busy road. The place's security cameras showed Edwin booking a room, while I, Aundreah, wiped away tears, and the attendant didn't seem to notice what was happening. When we entered the room, Edwin ordered me to take off my clothes and shower in front of him. At that moment, I thought to myself, I'd rather die than do that. So I looked at him and said, "I don't care what you do to me now, because that would be worse than dying." He got very angry and pushed me onto the bed, then forced me to take a sleeping pill. Meanwhile, the police were still trying to find Edwin's first victim, 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer. They didn't know where she was, and the only clue was some blood-stained clothes they found in Edwin's shed. Even without her body, the prosecutor believed she could still be alive. Everyone, including myself, clung to the hope that she was fighting to survive. If we found her in time, maybe we could save her before it was too late. Kaylee was a 23-year-old who worked as a dental assistant in Bend. She hadn't been seen since the weekend, when her family said she went out for a walk near a local college. Shortly after Kaylee Sawyer's disappearance, Edwin Lara was considered a person of interest in the case. He worked as a security guard at the college where Kaylee was last seen. Meanwhile, Kaylee's family in Bend was becoming increasingly desperate as the hours passed without news of her. Years later, when reporter Keith Morrison from the breaking news program interviewed the family, everyone remembered how they tried to cling to memories of Kaylee during that first night without her. Kaylee's mother recalled something special her daughter said when she was 17. "Mom, when people talk about me, I want them to describe me as smart, strong, and funny." For her mother, nothing in the world made her smile more than her daughter. Kaylee's grandparents, Jim and Sharon Walden, were also heartbroken. They were looking forward to Kaylee's wedding to Cameron, her boyfriend. The two loved each other very much and would probably be engaged soon. They were a beautiful couple together, they said. Kaylee's best friend, Naomi, remembered how hard it was for Kaylee to choose a career because she wanted to experience a bit of everything. She wanted to be a plastic surgeon. She wanted to be a police officer. She wanted to be a chef. She wanted to be a photographer. The world was hers, and she didn't want to choose just one thing. While the police and prosecutor continued the search for Kaylee and Ben, Aundreah's situation at the motel was becoming increasingly frightening. Edwin was about to do something terrible, but suddenly his phone rang, interrupting what could have been an even worse moment. I didn't even know what that alarm was for, but it probably saved my life. When the alarm went off, Edwin looked scared and asked, "What's that? What does it mean?" That's when an idea came to me out of nowhere. I thought, this is my moment. I have to take my medicine. He asked, "Medicine for what?" And I replied, "I have an STD. You thought, if I say this, he won't want to hurt me? Yes. I was lying, but it was enough to scare him. Edwin jumped off the bed and started pacing nervously. Then, he picked up the phone and made a call. He seemed to believe there were police helicopters outside, even though the night was completely silent. I begged him to let me go, but it only made things worse. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man named Jack Levy was preparing to go out and photograph butterflies in a national park. It was very early, around 5 a.m. He was loading his equipment into his pickup truck when suddenly a strange man appeared out of nowhere, with a frightened handcuffed girl beside him, and demanded Jack hand over his car keys. Suddenly, the gun went off, and everything became confused in my head. I could only think, I just saw him shoot someone right in front of me. In panic, Edwin pulled me back and started running, gun in hand. We soon reached a gas station across the street. There, Edwin saw a car with the passenger door open. He went straight for the car, and in a matter of seconds, he threw me inside. He slammed the door and pointed the gun at the driver's head, saying, "Drive or I'll shoot." At that moment, the police still had no idea of all the chaos and crimes Edwin had already committed. People were already certain that something bad had happened to Kaylee, but no one knew that Aundreah was also missing until something unexpected happened. Jack Levy, the man Edwin shot in the chest at the motel, survived. He managed to call emergency services and said, "I'm at the Super 8 motel, I've been shot in the stomach." Jack didn't know who Edwin was, but he told the police about a young woman who seemed terrified and was handcuffed, following Edwin. He saw the two running towards a gas station across the street, where Edwin kidnapped a family and took them hostage. After talking to Jack and other witnesses at the gas station, the police quickly realized that the person Edwin was dragging along wasn't Kaylee, but Aundreah. With this news, Kaylee's mother's last hope vanished. She said to her husband, "I'm not foolish. I know she's not here with us anymore." As the police followed Edwin down the highway, the situation inside the car became increasingly tense. Edwin now had 3 more hostages: Nima, a 17-year-old who was driving, Nima's 14-year-old brother, and their grandmother, who didn't speak English. With a gun in his hand, Edwin shouted orders at Nima, while the grandmother, not understanding what was happening, began yelling at him. She didn't know what was going on, and who could understand such a frightening situation? In the midst of all this, Edwin grabbed the family's phones and handed them to Aundreah, while continuing to threaten everyone. Edwin then pointed the gun right in her face and ordered her to throw the cell phones out the window. Aundreah, trying to stay calm, thought quickly, "I threw them as far as I could, trying to hit the grass so the phones wouldn't break. That way, maybe the police could track us." Meanwhile, Nima, the young man who was driving, pleaded with Edwin, "Now that you have the car, please let us go." In an unexpected turn, Edwin agreed. He stopped the car in the middle of the road, asked everyone to get out, and with the gun still pointed at Aundreah, ordered her to follow Nima and his family out. But Edwin knew time was running out. Soon after releasing the hostages, police sirens began to sound in the distance. Desperate, he grabbed Aundreah's cell phone and started recording a video. Then he handed the phone back to her and at gunpoint ordered, "Post this on your Facebook now." Aundreah, frightened, did as he commanded. He even asked her to write something like, "Crazy killer on the loose." She knew he was serious and that her life was at risk if she didn't obey. When the police finally approached, Edwin floored the accelerator, driving at over 75 miles per hour. He grabbed Aundreah's phone again and suddenly called 911 while continuing his frenzied escape. Edwin was completely out of control. He drove as if there were no rules, weaving in and out of lanes, honking at all the cars around him, and making dangerous maneuvers that scared everyone. It was as if he was in a racing game, but in real life, with lives at stake. People on the streets barely had time to react to this chaotic scene. He pushed forward without caring about the risks, and the fear only grew for Aundreah, who was trapped in that car without knowing what Edwin's next move would be. The chase lasted about 15 minutes, but for those in the middle of it, it felt like an eternity. The police were right behind, trying to surround Edwin, but he kept speeding up, as if he was running from something much bigger than just the law. It was a race against time, and no one knew how it would end. Suddenly, in an unexpected move, Edwin slammed on the brakes. The car stopped in the middle of the road, kicking up dust and leaving tire marks on the asphalt. The tension in the air was palpable. He then turned to Aundreah, handed the cell phone back to her, and without saying a word, opened the car door. With his hands raised, he got out, surrendering to the police. Aundreah, dazed, stayed in the car, finally alone, without Edwin's threat beside her anymore. It was the first time since it all began that she could breathe, but relief came with despair. She grabbed the phone with trembling hands and started crying, sobbing as she tried to talk to the 911 operator, who guided her on what to do next. But what Aundreah didn't know was that her nightmare was far from over. Even though Edwin made it clear to the 911 operator that Aundreah had nothing to do with his crimes, a miscommunication between Oregon and California authorities resulted in her arrest. The police, without having all the information, treated Aundreah as an accomplice, and she was handcuffed along with Edwin. As the officers led her away, she could hardly believe what was happening. She had been a victim, but now she was being treated like a criminal. Now we want to hear your opinion. What did you think of this story? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts with us. We'd love to know what you think. Meanwhile, the police were focused on an even more urgent goal: finding Kaylee, the missing young woman Edwin had previously kidnapped. The detectives knew every second counted. As soon as Edwin was taken to the station, they began interrogating him. They needed quick answers, and Edwin, surprisingly, seemed willing to talk. On the way to jail, Aundreah was informed of something that made her even more nervous. Edwin was asking to speak with her. He wanted to see her. When the detectives finally confronted him, Edwin, with an air of superiority, introduced himself arrogantly. "You already know who I am." His attitude showed that he wasn't the least bit concerned about the consequences of his actions. On the contrary, he seemed to enjoy the attention and power he held over the situation. Despite all this confident posturing, Edwin didn't hesitate to tell the detectives where Kaylee was. He gave the address without much resistance, as if he knew that, one way or another, the game was coming to an end. The police immediately sent rescue teams and paramedics to the location indicated, along Highway 26 in Oregon. Everyone was hoping to find Kaylee alive, but the atmosphere was tense. When they finally arrived at the scene, the officers found Kaylee. She was there, but the scene was devastating. Kaylee had fought with all her might to survive, but help arrived too late. The paramedics did everything they could to try to revive her, but there was nothing more that could be done. The young woman had resisted as long as she could, but her life was tragically taken. The news of Kaylee's death deeply shook everyone involved. For Aundreah, who was still in a state of shock, the weight of the situation was overwhelming. She had been through a real hell, being kidnapped and threatened with death, and now, even free from Edwin, she still carried the pain of knowing that another young woman hadn't been as fortunate. While Edwin was being taken to face justice, it was left to the authorities and the victims' families to deal with the consequences of his cruel acts. Edwin's case wasn't just another crime, it left deep marks on everyone involved, and the memory of Kaylee, as well as Aundreah's suffering, would never be forgotten. Kaylee's body was found, and her family received the saddest news they could imagine. But along with this news came a shocking warning from the prosecutor. When the family asked when they could see her to identify the body, the answer was devastating: "You can't see her, she's unrecognizable." Kaylee's father recounted, heartbroken, that the last time he kissed his daughter on the forehead was through a black body bag. He knew that if he were to see her in that condition, he wouldn't be able to leave her side. Edwin, who was in custody, kept saying that Kaylee's death was an accident. He claimed that he hit her with the car, panicked, and hastily dumped her body somewhere. But Kaylee's injuries told a different story. The investigator then confronted Edwin. "Now tell me the truth, because what you said didn't happen that way." And to the investigator's shock and horror, Edwin began to describe what he really did. It all started when Kaylee had a fight with her boyfriend late at night and went out alone. Edwin, who worked as a security guard on campus, saw her walking and approached. He offered her a ride home, but Kaylee refused. That's when things started to get worse. Edwin got out of the car and ordered her to stop. It's worth noting that, at that time, the uniforms and cars of campus security were very similar to those of the police. Edwin tried to deceive Kaylee, pretending to be a police officer, but she realized something was wrong and tried to escape. At that moment, Edwin grabbed her and forced her into the car. The security car he was using was very similar to a police cruiser, with all the characteristics, including a cage in the back seat, which prevented any escape attempt. Kaylee, unconscious, had no chance to react as Edwin took her to an isolated parking lot. When she finally woke up, it was too late. Edwin recounted that when Kaylee realized what was happening, she tried to fight, but there wasn't much she could do in that situation. Kaylee was trapped in the back seat of the car, which had an acrylic cage. Desperate, she tried everything to call for help. She tried to turn on the emergency lights, grab the radio, honk the horn, anything to escape, because she knew the danger she was in. But Edwin attacked her while she was defenseless and then dragged her behind a tree, where he finished the crime using a huge rock, weighing about 66 pounds. These horrific details shocked the authorities, and the prosecutor decided to seek the death penalty for Edwin. But there was a problem. On the day he was arrested, the Reading police didn't allow him to have a lawyer, which is his right. Because of this, the judge ruled that Edwin's confession couldn't be used in the trial. Even knowing what really happened, the prosecutor and detectives had to start the case from scratch. But they didn't give up. The prosecutor said, "We have the evidence. If it was a death penalty case before, it still is now." So, they reconstructed the entire case and presented the evidence to Edwin's lawyers. With no way out, Edwin's defense made a proposal. If the prosecutor withdrew the death penalty request, Edwin would plead guilty and accept spending the rest of his life in prison, with no chance of release. The prosecutor took this decision to Kaylee's mother, Julie, and explained what would happen if it were a death penalty case. She would have to attend all the trials and appeals. "As long as he's on death row, I'll be there too," Julie said, showing the weight of this choice. While all this was happening, Aundreah, who had been wrongfully arrested, was finally released, and all charges against her were dropped. However, the Reading police never publicly apologized for her illegal arrest, nor for the way they denied Edwin's rights, which ended up complicating the case even more. I just spoke with Aundreah's family, and they confirmed that she was finally released by the police. Her grandmother, Elizabeth Maes, always believed in her granddaughter's innocence. She would say, "She's a good girl. She doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and we're church people. She doesn't know anything about these worldly things." Even with Edwin having already pleaded guilty, the case dragged on in court for almost 3 years. During this time, many people had to give their testimonies, including Aundreah, but the trauma she endured prevented her from speaking at that time. She said it was very difficult to be there, as it was the first time she had seen Edwin since everything happened, and he kept trying to look at her. During this period, Aundreah fell into a deep sadness. She struggled with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and gradually, it seemed she was losing her joy for life. Kaylee's family also suffered greatly. They sued the college where Edwin worked, as the school had not conducted a background check or psychological tests on him, and had allowed him to use equipment similar to that of police officers, even without proper training. The family won the lawsuit, which resulted in the creation of Kaylee's Law, prohibiting the use of such equipment on college campuses. In the midst of this tragedy, Kaylee's family decided to take action and said, "We're going to make sure no young person goes through what our daughter went through." Meanwhile, other people who were also Edwin's victims, like Nima and his family, as well as Jack Levy, the butterfly photographer who was nearly killed in a motel parking lot, moved on with their lives. Even Kaylee's mother, over time, learned to live without her daughter, focusing on the good memories she brought, rather than clinging to the pain of loss. She said, "Every morning, I wake up and love her more, just as I loved her when she was here. Sometimes I look at a picture of her and smile, happy to have had those moments." On the last day of the trial, Aundreah, who had been through so much and was stronger now, finally found the courage to speak. With the support of Kaylee's family, with whom she had formed a friendship because of the tragedy. She faced Edwin for the last time before his sentencing. There were no cameras in the courtroom, but when she came out, Aundreah repeated to reporters what she had proudly said. "You tried to paint me as a victim, as someone weak, but that's not me. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. I am a warrior. I defeated you, and I am truly blessed."